because the second dream is I wake up with this idea, very vivid, create a police database for police officers to record UFO sightings in the UK. And the strange thing is that having had that, I knew a person to take it to, Graham Birdsall. So you can see that this first dream led to a validation that led me to Graham, who just happened to be on my doorstep. And the bizarre thing now was he'd moved offices and he was only 3 miles away from where I worked. Mm-hmm. So I was a detective. I could call him for a cup of tea. Nobody knew where I was. It was on my patch, as it were. So that wasn't a problem, so I began to call in. But the process and the odds. So by the time this happens, this second dream, which was in December 2001, I went to Graham and said, I've had this dream. I just said idea, but it was really a dream. I've had this idea. And he said, well, what is it? I said, well, I want to create an unofficial national database for British police officers to record, collate British officer sightings. And I said, can I launch it with an article in UFO magazine, which was like the top magazine in Britain, and went to 40 odd countries. And he went, yeah, I like the idea of that, because it was all for credibility. And he was encouraging me to see where this journey went, in a sense. And he said, yeah, I'll publish that. Now, I'd never had anything published. You know, this was a big, big deal, and this was a glossy magazine. You could go to any store and get this glossy magazine, and I was going to be in it, so it was a big thrill for me. So in January, the next issue, January 2002, I launched the Proof Force Police Database, Police Reporting UFOs database, and essentially, right from then, I started to get letters from retired officers saying I had this experience, and I knew I'd tapped into something. And Graham thought it was great for the magazine because he'd got a serving detective bringing credibility to the subject that was kind of like demonised. And realistically, that is what drew me in, and there I am. And but one of the things that I never anticipated was doing media work, being asked to talk about police cases at conferences. I didn't even know, I knew there were conferences, but other than Graham's Leeds big international conference, I never really anticipated that that would be a kind of a spin-off, that you'd start lecturing. Well, I'd never lectured. I'd never done mass media. I'd done a little bit of media. I was comfortable with media in the police. I'd done a couple of police things, but nothing really fleeting. And suddenly you've been asked to talk in front of a couple of hundred people. And I found that I was very comfortable with that. Most of my colleagues would run a mile from a camera or a big audience. But for me, it was something that came very, very easily. And I don't want to sound that arrogant, but I think some people find it easier than others. And I was in that category. And so I then started to do more lectures, and then lots more media. And especially I had received a lot of national coverage, because this was serving police detective, like doing a database on UFOs. It did initially attract a lot of mainstream, so I did a lot of mainstream publicity. And honestly, it was like, bring it on. It's something I was very comfortable with. And here I am now, doing lectures all around the world, and I still have to kind of pinch myself that people want to pay for me to fly to another country to talk for 50, 60, 70 minutes about UFOs, and I'm thinking, this is bizarre. So I never take this for granted, but in reality, I look back on that journey and think that this cannot be just coincidence. And I'm not religious in any way. I respect people that are, but I'm not. I mean, I was brought up Church of England, I went to Sunday school, and I loved the biblical stories, but not for me as I got older. But I respect people that are. So for me, when I look back now, to have had, in a sense, 2 dreams that have played such an important part in my life, I don't think it's random. And I'd never heard of the word synchronicity, when I got into this subject, and people would talk about synchronicities, and I'm thinking, well, what's that word? And it's kind of more than coincidence. And in reality, so many strange little things have happened that I now just accept. And I guess it is in a kind of spiritual way, but not what I term as the biblical kind of religious aspect. But if somebody said to me that you are being guided, you've been chosen, then I would have to say, well, I feel compelled to do what I'm doing. So if you want to put it in those terms, then I guess I am. And I've talked to a number of other researchers, and we've all kind of had very similar kind of stories. My time was my initial sighting of 1976. Well, the amount of researchers I've spoken to have had kind of a pivotal moment in their life, a sighting, an experience, has been around the mid-70s, late 70s. Spoke to a number, and they're kind of similar stories. And they too thought, where am I going with this? And they've ended up doing what I'm doing now. And all I see is that I've been chosen to do the evidential side, because I understand what evidence is and what would stand up in a court of law. Other people have different aspects, but we're all kind of chosen to do little pieces of a jigsaw. Mm-hmm. And that's what's fascinating. And now, into my 16th year in public research since 2002, I do very much believe in synchronicity and believe that there is a path that I'm on. And I don't know where it's going to, but I know that I'm on a path, and for some reason I've been chosen to do what I'm doing. And I definitely feel compelled to do what I'm doing.
Wonderful. Can you elaborate on where the script stands, where it's going, and maybe talk a little bit about the police? What kind of sightings did you get? What kind of database was built? Is it still going?
Yeah. Well, the database is initially what I was known for, and I started off with 6 cases, all historical, that I read about in books, a few from magazines. 6 cases involving 10 police officers. Now into the 16th year, I have over 550 cases.
Wow.
Involving over 1,100 police officers, 1,100. It's not all police officers contacting me, it's a mixture of newspaper archive trolls, Freedom of Information Act requests, and officers contacting me. So it's a collation, that's what it was, to put it all in one place. But to have that many is pretty amazing when you only started off with 6 cases and now over 550. Now, the problem is that I decided to retire early from the police after 24 years in 2013 because I had the idea, it didn't come in a dream, but I had the idea to create a magazine, which was UFO Truth Easy, Truthy Magazine Easy, 96 pages. And that came about because after 2010 I began to do international lectures around the world, and have now done 15, 16 countries. And so again, this is another extension of taking it a little bit further. And then you meet like-minded researchers. And again, I think the magazine is no coincidence. It was in a strange kind of way. If we think about that I was drawn to Graham Birdsall and UFO magazine, well, sadly Graham passed away in September 2003. Now, at the time I was getting close to him, I got to know him pretty close in the last 2 years of his life, 2001 to 2003. And so when he died, I was still in the police. I'd be 43 when he died. And there's no way I could have retired at that time. So when he died, it created a huge vacuum. And I said, we've got to do something. You know, we've got to try to keep this going. And so without any knowledge of putting an e-zine together, now e-zines in 2003 were not done. But I created one because I created UFOmonthly.com, which ran for 4.5 years, and it was a small monthly, not on the scale now as what I do with UFO Truth magazine, but in a strange kind of way. As soon as he died, I created that, and that in a sense cut my teeth on having to format articles and basically compose and lay out things. And I look back now and think that was kind of like my apprenticeship for what was going to come later, because I didn't know I'd end up doing UFO Truth magazine then. And then through a same set of circumstances, I met my current wife, my second wife, and found that from always being the breadwinner in relationships, she earned more than me because she was a psychiatric nurse. So with my pension and my time in the RAF, I began to think, maybe I could take the risk of retiring earlier than I wanted to. Because really, once the bug took hold, I didn't really want to be in the police. I was good, but my mind was elsewhere. And so it was really just a question of timing. And then through, again, a set of circumstances, I meet Elaine, and she's got money of her own, and I'm thinking, maybe I could go early. And of course it was a big attraction, so through those kind of strange kind of backstory, she said, go for it. So I left after 24 years. I could have gone for another 6 years. I left, created the magazine. Well, that then gave you a platform to then approach, and in the run-up to that, I'd met pretty much all the world's top researchers. And of course there's good, bad and indifferent, and all the ones I respected, I approached them and said, would you write for the magazine, either as a regular column or an occasional article? And they all thought it was a great idea, because in a sense in the UK, after Graham had died, there was really nothing, and it created a huge vacuum in Britain. No big massive international conferences for all those years. And I said at the time, it's put British and European ufology back 10 years. But ironically, in the 2 years before Graham died, I was seeing him a lot, and I'm saying, you're doing too much work, Graham. And he was a bit of a perfectionist. He had to have his hand on everything. And I said, you need help. So what I never anticipated is, one, that he would die as a young man at the age of 49. But I was kind of, had he have lived, I was already saying to him, you need help. And I was kind of thinking to myself, I'd love to learn from you how to put a magazine together and maybe become deputy editor or something like that.
Yeah.
That was kind of my long-term plan then. But circumstances changed. Then you create your own e-zine. Well, in 2003, after he died, nobody liked reading off a computer screen. There was no tablet technology. There was no scalable, large font. You can do it with your fingers, large, small. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, when I retired in 2013, I approached all the top researchers, and they basically said, yeah, well, great idea. What I wanted to do was create a universal English language magazine. An e-zine allowed you to do that because there was no print cost, and now we had smartphone technology, we had tablet technology, where you could read a book. You could have 10,000 books on a Kindle. So in a sense, it was now the right time. So again, it made it very easy. Yes, it's nice to hold something, but again, things were just falling into place. It was now acceptable to read off a screen. It wasn't when Graham died. And it took another 10 years. And what did I say when Graham died? It's put ufology back 10 years. So it took, in a sense, 10 years before I was then in a strange position to be able to contemplate retiring early and then doing the magazine. So it was 10 years on. I kind of tried to fill the gap. And yes, it is nice to have a physical printed thing, but that the world is evolving and very few magazines are surviving now in print, and it will reduce with technology. But that was the journey, and it's still evolving, and I don't know where it's going to end, but I certainly see that my role is one to not preach to people, but to say, here is the information. This is very credible information, evidentially very credible. Pilots, astronauts, cosmonauts, radar operators, they're the world that I promote, because I know what evidence is. So this is my area, and who knows where that journey is going to be, but that's how I came to be.
We'll link the magazine, but maybe give people an idea of where they can come to see the magazine and how many issues there are, how often it comes out.
It's bi-monthly, created in April 2013, so bi-monthly since now. We're now just I'm just about to release issue 30. The website is www.ufotruthmagazine.co.uk. We have readers all over the world, and the beauty is it's just sent direct to your email address. You don't have to do anything. It costs very little, literally £12 in the UK, £13 in the UK, and a currency equivalent. But you asked about the police database. The cases, some of the cases that point to ET are absolutely tremendous. There are only two that I would say are where you've got close encounters of the third kind. A very famous one, which is a guy called Alan Godfrey. And now again, this is Britain's first recognised, well-documented abduction case. Now, when I first really got into UFOs, and I was kind of wary of the abduction field because I'm thinking, is it real, is it not? But of course, I was aware of this famous police story, Alan Godfrey from 1980, and guess where he lived? 30 miles away. So he could have been anywhere. So when I launched the database, he was one of the first people I contacted, and I then began to research his story on and off over an 18-month period, and I wrote a screenplay about what happened to him.
Wow.
And never gone anywhere because I've never submitted it, but I wrote his screenplay. And then and you asked about the conclusive proof. I did try to get the screenplay, and I did put it in the right formats, but what you're dealing with is if you've not got any kind of writing qualifications, if you've not done the right media courses kind of thing, it's a pretty much closed world, the screenplay world, unless you have a real slice of luck. Graham Birdsall, and actually you can see it on the wall, it's there. In fact, if you just direct the camera, you'll see it say UFO Magazine below the star. Yeah?
Okay, yeah.
And that's the letter that Graham wrote to me. That was his review of the script that I sent him. And I'll show you that in a minute, you can take a copy of it. And that's up on my wall because he'd give it a glowing endorsement, and that was from him. That's what he sent me. But when I submitted it, I didn't come from the right background. I didn't have the film school, that kind of thing. But I did eventually get several very good reviews. But what they do is you can go to people who have made films, and I'd say, right, would you read it? And they come back and they say, yeah, that's really good. But what they don't do is they don't say, but I'll introduce you to my agent kind of thing, blah, blah, blah. So it's never gone on anywhere. And then other things came along. Alan Godfrey's story. Didn't intend to write a screenplay, but I see things in film. My earliest passion in life was the cinema. So, like I said to you yesterday, I see things in scenes. And that's kind of why I don't see it in a book form, I see it in film and scenes. And so I wrote his story. And then, so that's the second UFO screenplay. And I'm beginning to think, well, I could write other things. But I then write a third UFO screenplay, which is a short story that nobody's aware of, based on somebody up in Newcastle in the north of England who said he had a 1940 abduction alien story. I can tell you about that off the screen. So again, gets diverted away to do that one. And then finally, in a strange twist, now you think about destiny and synchronicity. Between 1983 and 1989, I served in the Royal Air Force as a policeman. Now, one of their foremost roles at that time was guarding nuclear weapons, and it was called SD-814 duties. 365, 24/7, protecting nuclear weapon storage areas. Remember that, weapon storage areas. In Rendlesham Forest, in 1980, there were rumours that beams were being shone down into the weapons storage area, places where I'd worked. Now, by then, I'm aware of the Rendlesham Forest case, And in a strange kind of way, in 2009, the UFO Hunters program with Bill Burns approaches me and says, we're interested in your police database. We want to talk to some of the police officers. We'll make a documentary. I said, okay then. So, cutting a long story short, that happens. And in the run-up to the film crew coming over from the States, I say, well, you must be coming over not just to see me. Oh yeah, we're going to do a piece on Rendlesham Forest. And this is where I thought, well, I want to get involved in Rendlesham. I had a private interest because I always suspected, based on my innermost knowledge of how these places work, that there must be many more witnesses, not least personnel in the tower and on the ground walking around on foot patrol within the weapons storage area. So I said, who are they bringing across? And they said, we're bringing over Colonel Holt, the guy who wrote the Holt Memorandum. So I'm thinking, I've got to now suggest that I want to get involved. Bear in mind, at that point I'd done no official outward Rendlesham research, only private research of my own reading. And I said, well, I'd like to meet Colonel Holt. And they went, why? And I said, well, I told them my background. They went, that's interesting. Yeah, okay. So that's how I began my involvement in the Rendlesham Forest story. So you can change your own destiny. If I'd have said nothing, that opportunity would have been missed. But something compelled me to say, right, okay, this is a big coincidence. You did want to get involved. So that led me to meeting Colonel Holt. I was going up to the weapons storage area and I do a video at the top of him and he says, yeah, beams did come down into the weapons storage area and the people on the ground, the foot patrol, they saw the beams too. So it kind of then gets me into Rendlesham research publicly and later through the course of the magazine and meeting many of the principal people. I'm now heavily involved, ironically, in making an independent production about Rendlesham Forest. And this is again, you kind of keep going around in circles how these things connect. And now with this independent production, after having a 7-year collaboration period with Colonel Holt, as a result of meeting him, I now am making an independent production that came totally strangely to me. And then I now find that I'm co-writing and being the lead researcher for this. So then I've gone right back and started looking at everything. And it's amazing what you can find when you go back.
So you worked with nuclear weapons. Can you talk about how many people are involved in taking care of a nuclear weapon and what you think the connection is? Is there a UFO connection to nuclear weapons?
Absolutely. I mean, historically, if you know the subject of UFO history, we know that UFOs turn up literally after we start detonating the atomic bomb. It strikes me as no coincidence. Now, basically, historically, there have been many cases where UFOs have been seen over nuclear power plants, weapon storage areas, etc. Well documented. UFOs and Nukes comes to mind, arguably the best documentary ever made on factual cases about nuclear weapons. But in my own case, just Rendlesham Forest, I worked on 2 nuclear weapons storage areas. One at RAF Huntington in Suffolk, same county as where Rendlesham took place, although I didn't know of Rendlesham at the time, and RAF Larbrook in what was then West Germany. The weapons storage area at Huntington was one of the very largest. There were 2 really big ones in the UK, Marham and Huntington. Huntington was a massive site, geographically 3 times the size of the weapons storage area at Bentwaters. However, the Bentwaters site was almost identical to the site that I worked at in Germany, because don't forget that the Bentwaters site was actually created by the Royal Air Force and then leased to the Americans. So in a sense, the layout was essentially an RAF layout, and the one at RAF Larbrook in Germany was an identical layout. And I've got a photograph where I can show there, and me stood in front of the doors after the Larbrook base closed. That's an almost identical scenario to what you've got at Bentwaters. You asked me about number of people on shifts. In England, They didn't call it the weapons storage area, they called it the supplementary storage area. A weapons storage area in the Royal Air Force was a conventional bomb dump. A nuclear bomb dump was called a supplementary storage area, an SSA. And I've still got the badge saying SSA, right? The Americans just called it a weapons storage area. Now, on a conventional bomb dump for conventional weapons, you wouldn't ordinarily have more than 1 or 2 security personnel, and they wouldn't be police, they'd just be airmen guards deployed to it. Apart from on exercises, they would have a few more. On a nuclear base, this is 365 days of the year, 24/7. There are between 35 and 40 personnel per shift, and they would have 4 shifts, A, B, C and D. Okay? Which is identical to what happened with the Americans. Just the same. And if you look at the numbers involved there, it's about 35 to 40. And that would give you a mixture of people who were actually inside the weapons storage area, those are on mobile patrol, those who are on static patrol areas of the base. Because in certain scenarios, as was played out, the scenario, and I've talked to the people like Larry Warren, John Burroughs, the scenario was that it would be the Soviets dropping in on hang gliders, the Spetsnaz coming in, gliding in silently, getting onto the weapons storage area. That's what we were told. Little did we know. So that's more or less that everybody was told, that it was going to be the Soviets dropping down silently. So we had. But the real, even without, you know, some people, if you said to Colonel Holt, because he's an officer, were nuclear weapons stored at Bentwaters, he'd go, I can neither confirm or deny. And I think if you went to John Burroughs, he'd say, I can neither confirm or deny. I think if you went to Jim Pennison, I can neither confirm or deny. I can understand the officers, not particularly the airmen. Several airmen have said nuclear weapons, Larry Warren being one. But you can prove it on the numbers alone. 35 to 40. On a conventional bomb dump, you don't have more than 1 or 2. So this is very definitely a nuclear base. And I can say this, and I will say it, and I've said it publicly, that on the very first night I met Colonel Holt, he was retired at that point, we got on like a house on fire, we were met at a hotel, he didn't know who I was, I recognised him, approached him, the film crew are out doing filming, it's early evening, we end up spending the evening together, having a nice meal together. I fired loads of questions at him, because I'd just met him, this is December 2007, and he tells me, he says, there were more nuclear weapons there than anywhere else in Europe. Now it was a nuclear base, so it was supposed to have nuclear weapons, but I think it's the amount. And I wrote that down in a book when I went back to my room, not because I wanted to spy, but I wanted to remember as much as I could before I forgot it. You don't retain it. It wasn't recorded or anything. We then have a 7-year collaboration period. During that 7-year collaboration period, he met my wife. He came over for another documentary that actually it was a private documentary that actually never got aired. But he'd flown everybody in, and Nick Pope was involved in that. I was there, we were sort of in hotels kind of thing. And my wife came down, Lynn, my second wife. And we were in that collaboration phase, and I said, well, has anybody ever taken you around the site since 1980 and walked you around and gone through your audio tape at the same time to try to plot your movements? No. Okay, should we try that? We had a free morning, so we did that. And he was fully aware that my wife, I'd asked him, you know, she's got her iPhone, can we film as we go around? And she was just randomly doing that. And again, during one of the clips, and there was maybe 12 clips that she recorded on her iPhone, perhaps 40 minutes of footage collectively. And to be fair, she's not a camera woman, so she's a bit all over the place. But it had recorded some sound and audio. But 2 telling things came from that walk around. And without being on camera, and so it was not recorded, he told in front of my wife, he made a joke about there were more nuclear weapons than anywhere else in Europe. Now my wife, unbeknownst to me, remembered this because of a link to the Greenham Common. RAF Greenham Common was where the Americans were, and they were bringing in what was believed to be the cruise missiles and putting it into their weapons storage area, which was called the Glickham. Okay? But the real story, he was making this joke that actually all the nuclear weapons were at Bentwaters, and all the peace protesters, the nuclear disarmament peace protesters, were at Greenham Common. He's like making a joke. Now that resonated with her because she knew people that had empathies and had gone down as peace protesters. So she triggered that, and that was her trigger to remember that. He has since denied ever making those comments. But one, I've written it down the first time I met him, and two, he said it in front of my wife. He denies all this. One of the reasons is why there is no collaboration anymore. That you say one thing and then other things come out later that are not repeated or not admitted to.
So what kind of weapons do they have there, and how does it tie into history?
It ties into history because what they had there was tactical weapons, small low yield weapons, and essentially they were for aircraft. Now when I was in the Royal Air Force Police, we had exactly the same low yield nuclear weapons, but what you also had in the RAF that you didn't have with the Americans, they had what was called the QRA, which was a quick reaction alert. And this is where, aside from the weapons storage area, maybe half a mile away, there were like 4 hardened aircraft shelters that contained aircraft, of which they were hooked up to nuclear weapons all ready to deploy straight away. So these would be the first ones to go. And the way, on exercise, the way it would work is that if you were in a time of wartime crisis, they would open they'd open one door, and the plane would be fueled up, getting all ready to go, and then you would have to go up the top of the steps, see the pilot, and the RAF policeman would hold his authentication code up, which was the release code for that aircraft to open the other door and fly off and do its mission. Wow. So this is like this dual key system. Mm-hmm. So that's how it worked. The RAF policeman would climb up the ladder, show the pilot, and he'd go, yeah, that matches my code, crack the other door, off you fly, and off you do nuclear Armageddon.
Interesting.
That's how it worked. But the QRA, so they were loaded with nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons all the time, and they were ready to go within 5 minutes in a wartime situation. As far as I'm aware, at Bentwaters they didn't have a QRA, but the RAF had 2 nuclear elements. They had the storage facility, the bunkers, where they were housed, and then they also had a quick reaction alert, QRA, ready to go at a moment's notice should World War III begin.
But so Rendlesham Forest, you have 1980. So what's
1980 is still Cold War. It's Cold War, so they are on high alert. And it's manned 365 days, 24/7. Now, here's an interesting thing in relation to Rendlesham Forest, which is not widely known. Is yes, they had 4 shifts, A, B, C, and D.
So how many people would we have on, say, on a daily basis guarding the weapons storage area?
Well, you generally have a day shift and then a night shift. Now, they would probably have a day shift, what we call a mid shift, what in the UK we would call an in-between shift, going up to part of the night, and then you'd have a night shift, days and nights basically. They called their night shift a mid shift, which is a bit confusing, but it meant midnight shift onwards. But essentially, if you think that there's 35 to 40 on at any one time, but don't forget during the day there would be the administrative section where all the senior officers were based, the headquarters of the police security squadron, so you then have certain specialist daytime staff, etc. But in terms of working the weapons storage areas, think of 35 to 40 as the number. Yeah, at any one time, at any one shift. But what happened over the Christmas period, then this is lost and not appreciated, is that it was the one time when the shifts could intertwine slightly. Because what would happen is that if you were married and you got young children, it was coming up to Christmas, because the married guys wanted to spend time with their kids opening presents, Christmas Day, Boxing Day kind of thing. So what would happen is that the single guys would volunteer to fill in for some of the married guys off a different shift. So in theory, you could be on D shift, and then you might just do 2 shifts on B shift because the married guy wants to fill in. So it was the only time of the year when this happened. But in the midst of time, this has been forgotten. And this is what's led to genuine confusion when people say, no, he's on B shift, he's on C shift. It wasn't quite as clear as that over the Christmas period because of this. You wanted to get married guys off and spend time with the children. So this again is an important point which adds to the confusion but now explains part of the confusion. I'm normally on C shift and 38 years on, and it'd be hard for you to remember which exact shift you were on any one particular day because it could have moved a bit. And that's what we did, that's what I did.
So when an event happens like at Rendlesham Forest, on whatever day it was, how many people could potentially be involved? Was there a point where it was overlapping one shift to the other, where the event is taking place?
As I understand it, yes. As I understand it, there would be like a day shift, and then there would be like what we would call an afternoon shift, and then it would go into the night shift, etc. So you always had one shift that was off, but 3 of the shifts effectively were on, and 1 shift was off. And it's just the way the cycle went on the roster. But in the Rendlesham event, should there be an alert situation, whether it be UFO or any kind of military conflict, Russia, Soviet Union as it was then most of the people lived on the base. Most of the young airmen were only 18, 19, 20, single, so they had a vast block on base who they could say, right, get your kit on, you're there within 20 minutes. And of course, in a sense, that happened on from every now and again. All bases are tested. In the RAF, it was called TACEVAL, a tactical evaluation, and the base would go on alert, and then everybody, alarms going, you knew where to report to, you knew you had to get to a certain place with your kit bag, and then you were on duty for until the end of the exercise, which would sometimes go on 2 and 3 days, and they'd do nuclear practices and masks on, and we used to do 12 hours in, 12 hours on, 12 hours on, 12 hours off, and you'd do what was even called the hotbed system. You'd go into a big underground facility where you could be sleeping in a hotbed system where there's like 3 bunks. You get out, somebody gets out. So one's working days, one's working nights. So all those kind of scenarios. So in an alert situation, you could have a lot of people disposable. So if you think about, say, let's work on 35 times 4, that's 140 people, most of which, at least 100, would be on the base, who could very quickly be assembled. Now, from my point of view, and in my aspect of a researcher into Rendlesham, and again, this is not really explored, but should be, is I believe there is a lot of credence to say that certainly by the night of the 3rd or potentially 4th night of regular activity, of repeated activity of UFOs, I think the base, whilst it may not have been outwardly to the public on high alert, certainly within the security police squadron it was, and there's quite a lot of suggestion to think that they either thought that they might come back again. They've done it a couple of nights, it might come back, so we're going to be ready this time. There is that element to this, because it's so bizarre. How often do you get multiple consecutive night UFO incidents? I can't think really of any. So on this occasion, I certainly think by what we would consider the Halt night, whether that's a 3rd night or a 4th night, is still up for debate, because different people will say different things. The dates are still all mixed up. But when that happens, it's several days into this. And I think at that point there, I suspect there may well be anywhere of 40, 50, 60 security personnel who play some part in the way the night evolves. Because I certainly know now that things were happening at 9 PM on that night, and not really into the early hours. So things are starting from maybe 9, 10 p.m. all the way through till 4, 5 in the morning. And I think over that period of time, I think there was a degree now of panic going on, and this will be revealed in the documentary. I've got evidence now that suggests very strongly that the weapons storage area was on alert, and things and personnel were being ferried out into the forest for hours on end. There was interactions, and I think sadly over time, and because it was never investigated properly, because of the secrecy, it was never meant to get out and the fullness of time, a lot of this has been lost, and so we just have fragments now. And I don't think we're ever going to get a clear chronological story. It's lost in the midst of time. But what we need to be doing is getting these fragments recorded for posterity. And I think as time goes on, little pieces fall in. And I know that now going into the deepest research phase I've ever been in, I'm uncovering stuff that you can see some of these jigsaw pieces filling in. And so the thing is, let's capture them and let's try to make some sense of them, but let's not try to argue with each other. You weren't there then, you weren't there then, because it's entirely possible that they were, because there's multiple incidents all running at the same time, or over the course of 6 hours. This is not just a Holt goes out into the forest event. There's a lot more stuff going on before and after. And I think really on Holt's night now, and I think I can say it now, is that my research is saying that the earliest sighting on what is considered the Holt night is taking place around 5 to 6 p.m.
Wow.
in the forest. So this is way before Holt gets involved. So I think that will have triggered other people to come in and out, way before Holt ever gets there.
Now we've got a lot of investigations we've talked about before that if you are a military person investigating, you were there, you're investigating what's going on, you're limited by what you can say about the nuclear weapons, but you're sort of an outside researcher, so let me ask you, was there a connection to nuclear weapons at the Rendlesham incident in 1980, and what kind of evidence have we seen?
Well, the answer is yes, but I'm going to be slightly guarded because I am doing this documentary, and until it's out, the director would kill me for being too open about it now. But I want to allude to the fact that yes, a lot more is going to come out because the evidence is going to come out in the documentary. But what I will say to you is that my take on all of this is that the motive, the reason why Rendlesham Forest happened, and I've said it consistently since I got involved since 2007, is the motive as to why UFOs turn up at Rendlesham. It's about nuclear weapons. For me, it's a nuclear weapons inspection test.
By the intelligence?
By ET, whoever, by whatever it is, the phenomena, whatever you want to call it. They turn up because at a time of world crisis.
This is with the Russians, right?
They're the Soviets.
Yeah.
The Polish shipyard workers at Gdansk under Lech Wałęsa, who went on to become the president, they were up in revolt really against the Soviet.
Solidarity.
Yes, solidarity.
Yeah.
But what people don't realise that in December 1980, hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops were massing on the Polish border, and it was highly anticipated that they may well go in to try to crush the resistance. And if you think about it, they'd done it in Hungary and they'd done it in Czechoslovakia, so this was still a satellite state. So it was a time of world crisis. So if you're at a time of world crisis and heightened tensions, and also what was running, and most people don't realise it, is that there was the American hostage crisis running at the same time.
Is that right?
Yeah, the 50-odd hostages was still. So again, you've got in the Middle East, you've got the Soviets maybe going to trigger Third World War. Everybody is on pretty high alert. This is a dangerous time. So I think that nuclear weapons is the primary motive. They turn up because at a time of world crisis, they know that this weapons storage area has more nuclear weapons than anywhere else in Europe, and that broke the armament agreements between the UK and the Americans, and it was all a lie, and why are these here? They threatened to destabilize a very difficult world situation.
So these would be the weapons that would be used if say the British and the Americans were
if you went to war,
to the Iron Curtain,
if we went into a conflict Armageddon, four-minute warning kind of situation, there were weapons, there were the amount. It's not that there were weapons there; it's the amount, and they weren't where they're supposed to have been. And I think this is part of the secret of Rendlesham Forest. But the motive to me is clear. If you look historically, UFOs have a long history of going around bases. If you think of Maelstrom, 67, Captain Robert Salas, the Minuteman missiles being shut down, it's happened in the Soviet Union where they've even been switched on. So this is not new. So they turn up for a reason, and the most logical reason is that there's a cache, an unknown cache of nuclear weapons there that shouldn't be there in those numbers, and they come, and the rumours are, which I think will be now proved in the documentary, the rumours will transpire that the beams were shone down into the weapons storage area. Remember the video? Holt says it. I've got it. I asked him. Top of the tower, weapons storage area. And he says, almost verbatim, yes, the guy in the tower, he contacted me, and he told me in no uncertain terms that that a beam was shone down into the weapons storage area. And I didn't expect him to say this, and the guys on the foot patrol saw it too. Now, I think there's more evidence to come, which will come out in the documentary, that backs that up, and I think we'll maybe put some names to that. So, for me, this is all along. So when the media go, why do they turn up in little rural Suffolk? It's because there has to be a reason. At the time of world crisis, they threatened the peace and the rules of engagement, as it were. I think that's the reason why they turn up.
What happens after that? When do they shut down, take out the nuclear weapons? Does Britain still have nuclear weapons, or?
The RAF Larbrook closed when in Germany. That closed in the early 90s, I think 1993. I don't know if RAF Huntington has still got nuclear weapons. I suspect not. We will still have tactical nuclear weapons, so I suspect that we've probably got either Marham or Larbrook working, but it will probably only be one of them. I don't actually know, but we still have tactical nuclear weapons, and we still have, in theory, a capability to respond to what would now be Russian aggression. So we will still have nuclear weapons.
Do you consider the Rendlesham case one of the more significant cases of all time?
For me, yes, for a number of reasons, and it's still evolving. The real problem that you've had with Rendlesham is it's not been handled very well. He was never supposed to get out. There are maybe very good reasons why certain details haven't come to light even now. And I think that will be addressed in the documentary, Capel Green. There are lots of political reasons why things have not been alluded to that will be addressed. What you've got to understand is, and what makes this case so amazing is, how often do you get a senior military commander of a nuclear strike base, i.e. the then Lieutenant Colonel, Deputy Base Commander of a nuclear strike facility, going on paper, writing a one-page memo to the MOD, which he didn't want to write, he would rather have not, he was kind of like bullied into it, got to write it because it's happened on British soil. That 3 paragraphs is arguably one of the top 5 documents in the world, because it says of somebody of his rank, 1, there was a landed triangular craft found on the first night, 2, that the second paragraph alludes to the ground trace evidence, the depressions in the ground, the radiation readings, etc. And the third paragraph to me is actually the highlight, because it's Holt himself saying, I saw multiple UFOs myself on paper. Now, how often, and we mentioned it earlier, how often can you think of a UFO case, a military case, where there are upwards of maybe 50, 60 people, military people involved, and there are repeated nights, consecutive nights of UFO activity, and it includes nuclear weapons, and you've got multiple incidents. You've also got civilians, you've got ground trace evidence as well. Now, there's also the allegation that Colonel Williams, the base commander, had a face-to-face with some kind of entity, whatever you call it, in a field. If that was real, would the Americans, would the British government, would the American government, would the American military, the UK military want to admit that the base commander of a nuclear strike base had a face-to-face in a field with some entities? I suggest that's a very good reason why they don't want that story to be true. And the question is, and it will be addressed very thoroughly in this new documentary, is there any evidence to support that? And I will say, yes, there is.
Beautiful. Finally, you run a conference. Can you maybe talk a little bit about your conference? We'll sort of describe what you've done so far, what you're planning to do in the future, and where it's held, and we can maybe get some people that may be interested in coming.
Well, again, a byproduct that I never anticipated was when I created the magazine in 2013. I'd never organised a conference in my life, but I'd been to lots. And of course, over time, you kind of think, well, that works. Yeah, this maybe could work. So I dipped my toes, as it were, and had a first conference in, I think it was November 2013, in Holmfirth, where I lived, a beautiful little hill village in West Yorkshire in England. That was just a one-day conference. Since then, we've graduated to now doing 2 a year. And we've just done, and you've just spoken at what we class as the Southern UK Conference, which is a one-day conference on the outskirts of London in Watford, and it's 1 day, 4 speakers, maybe 5, but we do 2 a year. We do a one-day one, a Southern UK one, in like the April, and then in the September we do a 2-day international conference, the big conference, in Holmfirth, close to where I live, and where you've been staying in your hotel. A very pretty town, would you agree?
Beautiful, beautiful.
Right, a very quaint town, and basically that's the big international 2-day one. And ironically, when I first muted the idea of holding a big international conference for 2 days, all the local shop owners, I'm passing out the leaflets, they're going, UFO, is it crazy? Now they love me, because all the hotels get booked, they get loads of restaurant bookings, all the shops get full. Oh yeah, give us your leaflet, we'll put that out. So we've made them note, but in conferences I believe less is more.